The eighth and final scheduled hearing of the House January 6th Select Committee is set for Thursday night. The committee will present a timeline of events on January 6th, focusing on a critical window of 187 minutes, the time between Donald Trump's speech near the White House and his call for supporters to leave the Capitol. What was he doing during that time? Where was he? What was going on at the White House? Questions many Americans want answered. Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger and Democratic Congresswoman Elaine Luria, both veterans, will be leading the hearing. Luria says the panel will demonstrate Trump's dereliction of duty on January 6th. The witnesses will include Trump's Deputy White House Press Secretary Sarah Matthews and Matthew Pottinger, a member of the National Security Council during the Trump administration. Both were among a wave of Trump officials who resigned after the Capitol attack. The committee says it also has new evidence to share, but don't expect to see those deleted Secret Service text messages. The committee says it received just one text message in that trove of records it subpoenaed last week. Just one text. Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy of Florida, a member of the January 6th Select Committee, spoke with MSNBC about the missing text on Tuesday.
They received 4 requests from congressional committees on January 16th to preserve records, and they had this planned migration for the 25th, I believe, of January. And nobody along the way stopped and thought, well, maybe we shouldn't do the migration of data and of the devices until we are able to fulfill these 4 requests from Congress.
We'll have to see what comes out of Thursday's hearing. But now, over in the right-wing media universe, it's hard to say whether any new evidence or testimony will change the minds of Donald Trump's supporters. Last month, we heard explosive testimony from Cassidy Hutchinson, a former aide to Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows. She recalled hearing Trump demand that metal detectors used to keep armed people away from the president be removed. "They're not here to hurt me," she recalled the president saying about the crowd. In response to Hutchinson, you heard a lot of the standard blanket denialism on Fox News.
Today we heard more rumors, a ton of hearsay, and wow, a lot of impeached testimony that we'll get to in a second.
When Mr. Renato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
Okay, it's just bad acting. Now, this was the tidbit that the media, they've been waiting for years. Finally, they had Trump.
If you heard this story and you thought, man, I believe every word of this, I'm going to go online and say something about it energetically, something is wrong with you. Something is wrong with you if you're that gullible.
No surprise there. Fox will do anything to distract from the facts. Greg Kelly from Newsmax, another right-wing channel, tweeted, "Cassidy was a joke and full of crap, but Hutchinson's testimony may have cracked the right-wing media firewall, at least a little bit." Have a listen to Fox's Bret Baier.
This testimony was very compelling from beginning to end. She obviously had access to all of the players. We are now hearing from the former president on various posts where he questions her accuracy. Cassidy Hutchinson is under oath on Capitol Hill. The president is on Truth Social making his statements.
And the Washington Examiner, a conservative news site, put out an editorial on Trump being unfit for power. They wrote, "Hutchinson's resume alone should establish her credibility," and said that what Hutchinson relayed was disturbing. Former prosecutor Andrew McCarthy, a frequent Fox guest and a columnist at the Conservative National Review, wrote, "Things will not be the same after this." And while McCarthy continued to attack the January 6th committee's legitimacy, he wrote, quote, "It does not mean that we can blithely dismiss any evidence the committee discloses." Now, it's reasonable for anyone to wonder, is anyone who supports Trump even listening to these hearings? Paying attention at all to this evidence? Can this actually change anyone's opinion of Trump on the right? Joining me now to explore these questions is Nicole Hemmer, Associate Research Scholar at Columbia University and author of Messengers on the Right, Conservative Media and the Transformation of American Politics. Welcome, Nicole. Now, after Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony last month, you wrote in a piece for CNN, it was, quote, "so much worse than Watergate." Do you think these hearings have started to make a dent in the right-wing echo chamber that tried to discredit this whole investigation? We pointed out Bret Baier calling her testimony compelling. Should we be surprised by that?
Well, I don't think that we should be too surprised because the sites and the people that you pointed out that broke from what I would call Republican or right-wing orthodoxy on the January 6th hearings are the ones that have been dismissed by Trump supporters over the past 5 or 6 years. National Review, the newsier side of Fox News, the Washington Examiner. But if you look at the rest of the conservative media sphere, what you are hearing is what you're hearing from Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham, that these hearings aren't that big a deal, that Hutchinson's testimony was either small ball or that it was completely made up, and that the real crime here is the January 6th hearings themselves, that those are a kind of political retribution that's of a piece with an attempt to diminish the crimes of January 6th.
The Select Committee has gone to great lengths to not politicize these hearings, saying that it's a matter of democracy for all Americans and including bipartisan voices. It's saying that it's not an attack on the Republican Party. But that's now not how it's been read by the right. I wonder, do you think there's any chance the right will get past the partisan perception of this investigation? Is there any evidence, do you believe, that could sway them?
I don't really think so. I mean, I've heard some anecdotal evidence that there have been some people who have heard the evidence coming out in these hearings and been shocked by it. Trump supporters who just want to move on from the drama and, frankly, the criminality and corruption of the Trump years. But again, that's anecdotal. If you look at polls, what you're still seeing is pretty robust support for Donald Trump. So I think that to think about this just in terms of evidence that will move people away from Donald Trump, that's a mistake that people have made a lot over the past 5 years, to suggest that support for Donald Trump is based on evidence, that it is something that people can be persuaded out of or can be convinced out of using evidence-based arguments. That's not what we've seen in the past, and it's not necessarily what we're seeing with the January 6th committee.
I want to ask you about coverage. Fox got plenty of backlash for not covering the first January 6th hearing, which was in prime time. Since then, the network has carried the other hearings live during the day, although sometimes not in full. They appear to be planning to carry this final primetime hearing on Fox News. What should we make of how they've been covering these hearings?
I think that it is important that there's a sense within Fox News and across conservative media that even as they say that these hearings aren't important, that we shouldn't be paying attention to them, that apparently they're big enough that they really can't ignore it. They see that they're paying too high of a price by ignoring it entirely. And so instead they're taking these hearings and then trying to frame the information that comes out of them in a more useful way for Donald Trump and for the right. But I do think that says something about the importance and the newsworthiness of these hearings, that conservative media outlets feel they can't simply ignore them.
After the first hearings, David French, senior editor at the Dispatch, tweeted, quote, "Tens of millions still don't understand the reality of January 6th, in large part because the news outlets and personalities they trust are deliberately lying and or withholding the plain truth about Trump and that dreadful day." So are we just doomed to an America that lives in these two universes, one where Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony is more incriminating than Watergate, and the other where she's a terrible actress who's lying?
So I wouldn't use the word doomed necessarily, because that suggests that it's just inevitable and that it's the end point of these historical processes, but it's choices that people are making every day that are what is diminishing the ability of the truth to get out across the country. And so I do think that it's worth retaining hope that political action and that information can be shared and can be useful and can change politics in the United States. But I do think it's worth emphasizing that the incentive structure on the right is such that there's not going to be a big tidal change anytime soon just in response to new evidence or new information.
So we have this final hearing coming up on Thursday night. What are you most curious to hear? Are there any questions you're hoping the committee will address in particular that are still out there?
So I do think that there are some questions that came up around Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony that have been repeated quite a lot in right-wing media about counter narratives that it would be great for the committee to respond to. At the same time, I think the biggest thing that the committee can do is to continue to tell a story, to help people to understand and make sense of all of this evidence that they're putting forward. They've done a pretty good job of this throughout, but continuing to connect the dots to make clear the choices that were made that made January 6th the deadly day that it was.